So is there something I should just not look at it? Or
No, that's fine.
if I look at you, that's...
That's good. Today is the 7th of December 2010. I'm in Coxsackie, New York. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm with the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and your date and place of birth, please?
My name is Robert Charles Derosiers, and I was born in Hartford Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut on September 9th, 1958.
Did you attend school in Hartford?
I did. For the first 6 grades, excuse me, kindergarten through 6th grade, I spent in Hartford, St. Peter's Catholic School. Pardon me.
That's all right.
And then we moved when I was almost 12. We moved to the suburbs, just south of us to Wethersfield, and I went to junior high and high school there in Wethersfield, and then went to
What year did you graduate from high school?
1976, bicentennial year.
And then you went on to college?
Went on to college at Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I cross-enrolled for ROTC, Army ROTC at Worcester Polytechnic Institute.
And what did you major in college?
I had a Bachelor of Arts in Social and Rehabilitative Services.
And you were commissioned as a second lieutenant upon graduation?
Correct.
And where did you go from there?
Initially, I went to the officers. I apologize, I'm just over.
They continue?
Yeah, my initial training was at the Officer Basic Course for Adjutant General Officers. It was at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was there for about 2 months.
And what did you think of active duty life at that point?
Actually, it was pretty good. At that point in time, they called it Uncle Ben's Rest Home. It was pretty laid back, and it wasn't real rigorous. Actually, the year before, when I was at the ROTC advanced course at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, it was much more. You know, getting up at 3:30 in the morning, going out to physical training, and then training all day, and so that was much more rigorous than the Officer Basic course.
And where did you go after Fort Ben?
My initial assignment after that was 3 years at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas.
And what was your duty assignment there?
Well, I'm a personnel officer by primary specialty, and I worked in what they call the Military Personnel Office for the first almost 2 years. Then I got kind of tired of the higher headquarters, so I went down and served as an assistant adjutant at the 11th Air Defense Artillery Brigade.
Okay. That was at brigade level?
Brigade level.
And what were your duties and
I
responsibilities?
was kind of like the second. I answered to I was first lieutenant by then. I answered to a major who was an air defense officer, and we took care of all the personnel needs and requirements of the 3,000 soldiers that were assigned to the brigade. And because I had just come from the military personnel office, I knew the people we needed to know, and I knew the systems well enough that I kind of became, the go-to guy. And it was very helpful to my boss, who was an air defense officer, who, his primary had been air defense artillery for 12 years or 13 years at that point. So it's kind of a unique position to be in.
Did you enjoy your job with that unit?
I did. I was always kind of on edge because it was a unit that deployed, although it didn't deploy for conflict for another few years, but it did deploy places for training. And the brigade commander was a pretty tough cookie, and everybody was on edge. So although I enjoyed a lot of the excitement, I was also leery of doing something wrong and messing up, and especially having been in the Army only about 2 years at the time that I went down there. So it was kind of walking and running on eggshells and exciting at the same time.
What were your NCOs like?
Kind of ran the gamut because I had both personnel NCOs and air defense type NCOs. and they all kind of ran the gamut of being very laid back to very gung ho, and various back then in the early '80s, kind of coming off of Vietnam and the all volunteer force. It was just starting to kind of pick up and gain momentum. It had been kind of a depressed military, and it was just starting to pick up momentum. So you kind of had some of the ones that couldn't wait to get out and did as little as possible, and then you had kind of the younger ones who were kind of the new breed and kind of really gung ho and professional.
Were there women integrated into the service?
Yes.
At that point?
Yes. I'm trying to think. I don't know any percentages, but there were quite a few, and even in the air defense artillery, there were quite a few. Now that's not a combat; that's a combat support as opposed to a combat arms. So that was not abnormal. But you didn't have women, in with the infantry and the armor,
Sure.
that kind of thing at the time.
Did you go on any of the deployments at all?
Just training deployments. I know they did go to the Sinai as part of the peacekeeping force there. They went to Israel. I didn't get to do that. I just went to places like Fort Bragg, North Carolina for a couple of weeks because they were part of the 18th Airborne Corps deployment readiness package. So we went and trained with them.
Did you have any jump school?
No, the only two times I had a chance for jump school, the first time I didn't get a chance to go because I had mononucleosis, and then by the second time I had an eye injury, and I just didn't want a chance something happening, and messing up the surgery that I had. So.
All right. So you were with that unit for about 3 years?
That unit for only the last year I was in El Paso. Then my 3-year tour was up, and I spent the next 3 years at. I kind of want to, I always missed home, and I kind of want to be where I could get home if I could, as much as possible. So I ended up going to a military entrance processing station. In your day, they used to call the AFIS induction station, probably, up in Portland, Maine. And I was a testing officer where, we gave the ASVAB, Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery, flight tests, all the different specialty tests that people had to take if they were going to qualify for certain jobs.
What did you think of Portland, Maine?
I loved it. Fell in love with it. Tore my heart out to leave. Get that to know a lot of people there. Not only I had a perfect situation. I loved where I worked. The community that I was in, I loved where I lived. The church that I was part of. It was very difficult to leave. Very difficult.
So you spent 3 years there.
Spent 3 years there.
It
I was only about 200 miles from home, so I got to go back and forth almost everywhere I wanted.
Now, at that point, were you a captain?
I was promoted to captain about 6-7 months after I got to Portland.
And did your duties and responsibilities change much at that point?
I mean, I was a lieutenant promotable when I got there, which they assign you as a captain. So for the whole time I was there, I did what a captain would do.
Okay. You weren't an XO or?
No, I was I started as a testing officer, then I moved into the operations part, and that was kind of like an XO.
Okay.
Yeah, because my boss was the commander of the MEPS.
All right. So you spent 3 years there.
And our job was to support all the recruiters. Although we didn't do recruiting, all the recruits would come to us and we'd qualify them through the ASVAB, then through medical exam, and then through any other special things that had to happen. Everything was done, all their paperwork done, fingerprinting, and then they were, at that point, either in the delayed entry program or went on active duty.
Okay. And after Portland, where did they send you?
Then I went back to the Officers Advanced Course, back to Fort Benjamin Harrison, and in the interim 6 years, the place had really kind of upped its rhythm, and it was no longer the Uncle Ben's Rest Home that it used to be called that. And by then, the military under Reagan had really been pumped up, not only with money, but he was very pro-military, and I'd say that the expectations, the standards, the training, and the professionalism had all increased and gotten better in the 6 years. And when I went back to Fort Harrison, it was really a different place than when I had been there as a brand spanking new lieutenant. Spent 6 months there in the officer advanced course. And I already knew at that point that I would spend, after that was March of '87 by then, that I would spend the next 12 months over in Yongsan, Korea, which is where 8th Army headquarters was in South Korea.
And how did you get over to Korea? Did you fly over?
I flew over, yeah. It was a military flight. Commercial means what they called it a military flight because most of the people on there were being assigned somewhere in South Korea.
Did you go over there as an individual, as a replacement?
Yeah. Yeah, I replaced another captain specifically at the Personnel Administration Center that supported the 8th Army headquarters, which also it kind of wore 4 hats. It was 8th Army headquarters, United States Forces Korea, Combined Forces Command Korea, which that brought in the South Korean military. United States Forces Korea was Marines, Air Force, Navy, and Army together. 8th Army was strictly the Army side. The Combined Forces Command brought in the element from South Korea. And then it was also the United Nations Command. So there was that part. So it was pretty crazy trying to keep track of who was assigned to which, because some of those were mixed together. It was a real nightmare for personnel people to kind of keep track of who's who, because when we thought somebody was, being assigned as this for, say, 8th Army, they were using, once they got up there to the headquarters, they were using them over here on this side as United States Forces Korea. So it was always a nightmare trying to keep track of who's who.
Did you find that you were well prepared for the job after 6 years
Yes
under
and
your
no.
belt?
Yes and no. My problem over there is coming out of the advanced course, I was really gung-ho. I had a real, give me the worst job in the world, toughest job in the world, I'll tackle it. And trying to put your arms around the breadth and the depth of the support requirements of that entity, and to do it quickly, because you didn't have much time to get it, to be an expert, because you were constantly being bombarded with calls from brigadier generals and full colonels and major generals who wanted something right now. And you couldn't turn to your boss and say, can you shield me from some of this, because they were all outranked by far. So you had to just react. And because I didn't feel that that I could do it perfectly at that time, after about 2 months, I was mentally burned out.
So the job was pretty stressful.
It was the most difficult job, and part of it was because my own attitude of just do what you can do, and don't let it ruin your life. I took it all too much to heart. But I think it was complicated, the most complicated job that I had ever had in the Army.
So what happened after the 2 months there?
Well, I just I gutted it out the rest of the time, and there was so much going on. There was so much. It was the kind of unit that I don't think the higher ups could figure out what the best way to support the headquarters was, and it's take too long, complicated to explain. But they were constantly trying to remold our support base to do what they thought was best. So I was right in the middle of not only trying to support what we were doing, but changing and reconfiguring our unit to then support not only what we were doing, but something else we were taking on. And when I went back there 9 years later, they had changed it back to what originally we were. It was constantly going back and forth.
Did you work with the Koreans at all?
At that point, well, yes and no. We always had what they call Korean augmentees to the United States Army. Because in the Korean Army, you either could be in the Korean Army or you could choose to be an augmentee to the United States Army. And as far as the Koreans were concerned, they thought that the code name for that, or the acronym, was KATUSA, Korea Augment T2, United States Army KATUSA. They thought that we treated KATUSAs easier than what they would treat their own. So KATUSAs were kind of looked down upon a little bit by their own, and they enjoyed being with the Americans. And usually they were ones that had gone to college. And so they were a little more educated than the average level of education, than the average Korean Army.
What was your overall impression of Korea?
I thought that the younger generation was losing sight of what the United States had done in the Korean War to help them maintain their sovereignty, because they were constantly out near the big university. They were constantly having protests, and then the Korean police would come out with the tear gas, and that would filter over to where we were, and you could smell the tear gas. You knew what was going on. But generally, they seemed to really love Americans. They just probably liked the idea that someone was having to stay with them. The younger generation was like, well, what are they doing here? We should be able to take care of ourselves. But
what were your living quarters like?
actually, pretty nice. I was in what they call Quonset huts, which I think were left over from the Korean years, but they were kept in very good shape. And I had a roommate, and we had kitchen, common kitchen, our bedrooms, bathroom, and then a kind of a common living area. Not big, but pretty nice. No complaints.
What did you do on your time off?
Well, I got to know my lieutenant. I was a captain. My lieutenant had been born and educated in Korea. Came to the United States for college with his parents. They came over, and I guess they had business over there. And then he went into the military, and they all came back. So he was a great resource in many ways, and he also kind of, was able to take me out places. And some of the people that I got to know there had been there a while. So people I knew from church there, people I knew from the headquarters, they would take me around. We'd go places, some of the museums, or we'd go down to the Korea Folk Village or Namsan Mountain, and, go skiing. So I got around a little bit.
What was the weather like there? Was it comparable to the States?
Not a whole lot different. Although in the summertime, it was pretty blistering hot and sweaty, kind of like being probably in Carolina or maybe even Florida in the summer. And then it had its monsoon season, where it was rainy. And sometimes over there, the rains would be so bad, it'd be quite a lot of flooding. Some disastrous flooding, actually, too.
Did you get any sort of R&R while you were over there? Or a chance to come back home?
Well, I chose not to take a mid-tour, which they usually give you a mid-tour a couple of weeks to go midway through, because I knew that my niece was getting married right about a month before I was to finally deploy back to the States. So I saved up my money and waited to go back for that, come back for a month, and then go back for good. So I didn't, but I thought I kind of saw enough of, I probably could have taken that time maybe to go to China or something like that, but I don't feel like I, cheated myself by any means.
When were you deployed back to the States?
I was there for just a little bit over a year and a couple weeks. I got back to the States in April of 1988, and I spent about 30 days at home on leave, and then I went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to the next level of schooling called the Combined Armed Service and Staff School, which that was the first time, the officer basic and advanced course, I did with all other adjutant general officers like myself, our specialty. This was the first time that I would be part of a team, and that's what they call it, combined arms, because it would be like being on a division staff. I'd be there with, you know, combat arms people, combat support people, combat service support people like myself. And it was kind of based on the division staff configuration. So as a personnel officer, I did a lot of input of what we did from a personnel perspective, whereas we'd go to the, you know, the combat people to say, okay, in this situation, you know, what kind of units do we need to do for this mission, that kind of thing, if we had to do mission analysis and things like that. And it was pretty stressful, you know, in a way. You had every night you had to do some kind of written an oral presentation as a group for the next day. So there was kind of like not a lot of slack period. You were always kind of having to do something.
How long were you there for?
I was there for 2 months.
2 months.
And then, right on the heels of that, I went to the public affairs officers course. Right about the 7th, 8th year of your career, you are required to then select a secondary, or they call it a functional area. And a lot of times people end up staying in that functional area, you know, if they really enjoy it. But for most people, they do a tour with that, then go back to their, or they flop back and forth, depending on the assignments. So I went to the public affairs officer course, back and forth, Benjamin, Harrison, Indiana. So that was the third time I went there. I was there for 2 months.
And what was that course like?
In a way, not stressful militarily as much, because you also had civilians in your group. But we still had to keep up our military bearing and our physical training, that kind of stuff, on our own. And again, you didn't have a lot of slack time. You always had to prepare. You had lots of homework. You always had to prepare something for the next day. So it was challenging. I don't know if stressful is the right word. Challenging is probably a better term. And you did group work and individual work. And I thought it was a very well-run school. In fact, all the military ones, but I particularly enjoyed that one.
And what happened next?
Well, then I went to Fort Drum in Watertown, near Watertown, New York. In fact, I knew that. I knew back when I was in Maine that I was going to go to the advanced course, and I was going to go to Korea. And when you go to Korea, that's considered a hardship tour. You can choose where you come back to. So I chose Watertown because I felt, again, it was close enough a day's drive I could drive to see my parents and my family. Because all this time I was single. I didn't get married till after I got out of the military. But I did meet my future wife up at Fort Drum. And I was assigned there as a public affairs detachment commander. So I got command time with this little public affairs team. And we were attached to the 10th Mountain Division, which was just forming itself. It was not a brand new division in that it existed during World War II. But Fort Drum had chosen to stay open, and they used it as the headquarters for this 10th Mountain Division, which was a light infantry. So they didn't have tanks and things like that. You know, they did their stuff on foot mostly. And what light infantry did was they got kind of like the Marines in a way. They had to be ready to go to the desert, to the jungle, to the urban terrain, forest. They had to be ready for anything. So it was pretty exciting. It was, things were just kind of coming together. There was a brigade up there. They brought a 2nd brigade in just after I got there. And they had a 3rd brigade that was stationed elsewhere that belonged to them upon major deployment.
Now, were you still a captain at that point?
I was a captain, and then about a year and a half later, I was selected to be a major. But it took about from the time I was selected to when I officially pinned it on, when I officially was recognized and paid as a major, it was 2 years. But in the interim, I went to Saudi Arabia, and then I actually got what they call frocked. They gave me the rank without the pay. So authority without the pay kind of thing. So I did 2 years as a public affairs detachment commander.
Now this was in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I'm still
Okay.
in Watertown. I was just about 2 years there. During that time, Noriega had been ousted as dictator down in Panama, and some of our, in fact, our military police company had been sent down to be part of that, and my future wife was in that group. And in fact, I got to interview her and her gang as part of my public affairs duties when they came back, so it was kind of interesting. And just as I was thinking about, okay, after 2 years of doing this and enjoying it and going to places like, Germany for training and things like that, I was going to go back to being a personnel officer. But Desert Shield, the invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein took place, and my group, my little team was on what they called their troop deployment list at the Forces Command headquarters. We were going to be sent out 34 days after they decided that we're going to Saudi Arabia, which that happened around the 5th of August. Yeah, a couple days after Saddam Hussein invaded, and the president sent Dick Cheney and Colin Powell and Schwarzkopf and people like that, and not Colin Powell, but Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf, who was the commander over there eventually, to Saudi Arabia to talk to the king and his people down there and convince them that they should allow troops, not only from the United States but other places, a coalition, to stand with them, because Saddam Hussein was not going to stop with Kuwait. He was on the border looking straight down at Saudi. And so 34 days later, my detachment we were ready to deploy, so that put my switch back to being a personnel officer on hold. And so on the 12th of September 1990, we deployed to Saudi Arabia.
How big a unit did you deploy with?
Just myself and 5 others. That was my team, and we attached ourselves to the 22nd Support Command in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, which was a unit that there was no unit until Desert Shield. So they went over there with a group of about 7 people, led by then Major General William Gus Pagonis and his closest friends, and they formed what eventually became a 50,000 person logistics support command for the entire theater of operations.
What was your impression of Saudi Arabia?
Well, a lot of desert.
Was it hot when you got over there?
When I got over there, it actually started cooling down, but it was still in excess of 110 degrees during the day. And then it would kind of go down to about 80 some degrees at night. The coldest that I ever got there was about 27 degrees in January. And then as I was leaving in May, it was starting to get up past, exceeding 100. So everybody walked around with bottles of water.
What were your living conditions like there?
Well, first when we got there, we stayed in tents. Called them Bedouin tents. They were the kind of tents that the Bedouins in the desert would throw up and pull down and move, and so they were just tentage, cots, so you didn't have to sleep right out in the sand.
Any problems with insects or fleas?
Oh, there was all sorts of that kind of thing. Oh yes, and if you had a insect net, that was a nice thing to have. But the biggest thing over there was staying hydrated. And yeah, unfortunately, there were a lot of vector-borne diseases that came out of Saudi Arabia. So yeah, I never had any problem, but there were eventually problems because of the insects and kind of diseases that they brought. But overall, Saudi Arabia, obviously a rich country, and they seem to be okay, the people that we were there, but they didn't like the way we handle ourselves. You know, if people were smoking cigarettes, they say, why do you have to do that in public? Or they did not allow women, they did not like the fact that, you know, there were a lot of women that were over there with us and that they had to deal with them. So if I go out with a couple of my people to go purchase things that we needed for our mission, they would deal right with me. They wouldn't even look at the females.
Now, did the females have to dress in the burqa?
No, they did not. But they did make a big to-do about, you know, if it was a hot day and, you know, females who were working, you know, with in the logistics where they were having to get down and ratchet wrenches and things like that and crawl underneath things, you know, they would take off their top cover and show their arms. They didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like that kind of thing. And, you know, that's their culture, but, you know, it kind of was like, well, you know, do you realize that we're here to help you, and
Mm-hmm.
couldn't you just look the other way on that kind of stuff? But so there was a kind of a tension, and we weren't really sure. We weren't really sure if the coalition was strong enough to stay together for the length of time it would take for this operation. So you always kind of watched your back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, you know, we did have a lot of resources over there. We did have a lot of resources. But when we first got there, you know, it was only about a month, and things were changing and moving and developing so fast. You had to fight for your own territory. You know, even in that command,
Mm-hmm.
because they had just people coming in from all over the place, and some that knew each other. So there was like an in crowd, an out crowd. And people just they wanted to maximize their situation. And at first it was pretty daunting for a Captain Promotable and his little team, who nobody knew,
Mm-hmm.
to break into this big conglomerate that was forming. And luckily, I think because of the nature of the business I was in, and my big boss, the two-star general, William Gus Pagonis, he was savvy enough to realize that and he had already spoken with Dan Rather, even before I got there. So he'd already been exposed to the media.
Mm-hmm.
And he was savvy enough to realize that he could get not only the logisticians some exposure, because obviously this was, you know, a big thing happening, this build-up, and usually always the people on the very front lines would get a lot of the exposure, but he knew he could get it not only for his people, but also for the Guard Reserve, because I think he was far thinking, as the next decade after that would develop, the Guard Reserve, as you know, would take on an even bigger role than it had for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he was thinking, I can help the Guard Reserve out here, because, you know, most of his 50,000 people were Guard Reserve. You know, they come over and become part of his headquarters, because most of them were maintenance units, supply units, personnel units, you know, things that just kind of fit under the combat service support arena. So,
What did you do over there for entertainment? Did you have movies or?
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we had a lot of people sending us movies, VCRs. You know, they set up kind of R&R places, and eventually I think it was Britain sent over the Princess Cunard, which was a cruise ship, and docked it off the coast of Bahrain, and that became an R&R for 3 or 4 days, an R&R place, which I got to do after the war had ended.
Mm-hmm.
I came back down from King Khalid Military City up near the border. I came back down to do some business, back in the Maine headquarters, and they said, you need to go take a few days and do this, so I did. It was wonderful.
When you were in the border area, any incidents at all?
We always had a morning and an afternoon big staff call, and in the afternoon one day we had some air defense artillery around us, and a Scud missile was fired our way, and the first thing we felt that shook the ground was the Patriot missile, local Patriot missile, leaving its launch, and the next thing, the big burst and ground shake was it popping up somewhere overhead, and the debris landed, I don't know, maybe a couple football fields away. So that was one.
It was pretty close.
That was the closest, yeah. And I got a chance to fly up and see the aftermath of the bombing in Kuwait when when we really were bombing Kuwait. They had these big. One of the things that the Saddam's people did in order to keep everybody out of Kuwait after they overtook Kuwait was they set up these defenses with a big, huge line after line after line, row after row of these big trenches that they poured fuel into that they would light on fire, so that if someone was coming at them, they would light on fire, and it would that and barbed wire and all that would keep our allies out of there. Well, the bombing campaign came and just bombed those things right on out, and I got the chance to see what those looked like. We had John Chancellor with us one day, and we were showing him around the front, and then we went off into Iraq just to see how the logistics lines were going, because at that time the war was officially still going on, but it wasn't turning out to be much of a fight. So it was pretty interesting.
So you ended up leaving in May?
Yeah, I ended up, I sent my little team home about a month early, and then I had to put the public affairs support in before I left, and strange enough, it was pretty interesting, because the way our command was being formed, people came over and they used who they had at the time. So after our command was formed, there were lieutenant colonels and colonels wanting to come over to take my place, and I was a captain promotable. And my boss says he was here when I needed him. He's here until he leaves. And he was very, very loyal like that. He took care of people that were loyal to him. And so I finally left when I think he was a lieutenant colonel, promotable, came over at the end of, I got home, I flew out and got home the night before, on a Friday night, got up to Watertown, slept because I was dead tired, jumped in my vehicle first thing in the morning, drove 5 hours to Connecticut to walk in a Memorial Day parade on a Saturday and Memorial weekend in my hometown. So that was nice. Really nice.
And how long was your leave for?
It took 30 days.
30 days.
Yeah, they said you need to take all of it. Take it. When I came back from that, I stayed at Fort Drum. Most people, after that, something like that, they come back, they immediately moved on to something else. I was happy to stay in Watertown, and that's the way I spent my whole career. I was never looking for the perfect job or the perfect exposure or the perfect. To me, the place was most important, and it was a place where I felt like I could get home.
Was it at that point you met your wife?
I had already met her. We started dating actually a couple months after I got back. And she was already on orders to Korea, so we started dating as she was getting ready to go to Korea. And I had no thoughts at that point of getting married, but she also had a dog that I was very fond of, and I just said one day, I said, do you have anyone to take care of your dog? And she goes, no. I said, well, I'll take care of it because I'll be here another year, or so at Fort Drum. So while she was off in Korea, I took care of the dog, and that kind of galvanized our relationship.
How long was she in Korea for?
She was there a year.
A year.
Yeah, I got home from, from Saudi in May of 1991. So we started dating August August, September. She actually left early February of '92, and I actually left Fort Drum in March of '93. When she came back, she went to her advanced course. She was an MP down in Fort McClellan, Alabama, and then she spent 6 months there. And in the meantime, I moved to Army Personnel Command in Alexandria, Virginia. That's the personnel headquarters for the entire Army. And so that was in Northern Virginia. She was then assigned to Fort Eustis in Southern Virginia, so we were about 3 hours away from each other, so we swapped weekends visiting, during the 3 years that I was there, that we were there.
Now, you were a major and she was a...
Yeah, I finally pinned on, I was frocked, they gave me major, I guess, to help me during the war, or maybe it was because it was actually kind of after the war. Maybe it was because it was a reward or something, and I had more authority in people's eyes. But I didn't actually officially become a major until almost 14 months later, while I was still at Fort Drum. So I became full-fledged major in May of '92. And so I went to Army Personnel Command as a major. When did she put on her captain? I'm trying to remember if she put her captain on while she was at the advanced course. I'm a little cloudy on that part, but for the most part during our years there, she was a captain. I was a major.
And when did you guys get married?
Well, I did 3 years there at Army Personnel Command. Then I got put on orders as I was going in front of the Lieutenant Colonel Board. I was put on orders for Korea, 2nd Infantry Division, which was not quite on the DMZ, but kind of was after the DMZ formed the umbrella protection there to Seoul. And so in February of 1996, I went over to Korea, and we were not engaged at that time. I was still very, gee whiz, am I really ready for marriage? Is marriage really for me? And while I was there, a month while I was there, the board results came out for the Lieutenant Colonel. I didn't make it. And I didn't have any great idea that I would. Because like I said, I didn't always look for the exposure jobs. I just was happy to be at a place. And a lot of times, in order to get ahead, you've got to kind of get certain jobs and get exposed and that kind of thing. And I suppose I could have hung around. I was actually asked to stay with General Pagonis, but I said, it's not really my thing to hang around in an entourage. I want to just go back home and be myself.
I'm going to just click that light on, if that's all right. Or you can sit there and I'll do it. So, okay, continue.
So I go off to Korea. I didn't get selected for Lieutenant Colonel, and that was actually a big relief for me. I kind of felt like I'd been just carrying this baggage around over the whole thing, and I started thinking clearer about the future after the Army. Because I knew at that time, having been in Army Personnel Command, that they were trying to downsize the Army. And I actually could have gotten out and retired before I left. They were offering early retirements. So before I went before the board, I could have gotten out as a major. Or after the first look, if I missed, I could get out. Or if I stayed for the second look and I missed, I could get out then. But they were always kind of shadowy about the way they worded that second opportunity or the second chance getting out, because they wanted people out earlier. So after a month, I came home for a wedding, and my girlfriend then and I went to the wedding, and that night we just kind of had a real heart and soul talk about the future, and it just seemed like, it's time to make a decision. So we decided to get married. And we kind of looked out and said, okay, how are we going to make this work? Because I was still going to be staying in for that second look. And she was going to be on our way to Germany. So we said, well, let's give ourselves enough time. We'll give ourselves a year and a half. So we looked at September of '97. So I go back to Korea. And a couple months later, in July of '96, I came back for another wedding. And at that time, they had sent the message out saying that those who were not selected for Lieutenant Colonel the first time, you can now put in your retirement if you want to. So we were talking about it, and she says, you know what? We're trying to figure out how you're going there, I'm here, we're kind of like, how are we going to pull this off? She says, you ever think about just getting out and taking it now? And it wasn't 30 seconds that it all just made sense to me, and I said, that's what I'll do. I'm going to go back to Korea, I'm going to put in my retirement. I'll come home and stay with my folks in the States for, it turned out to be 9 months. I call it going back to the womb. And I was able to, while she was in Germany, do a lot of things back in the States here to plan for the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd pop over to Germany a couple times, because back then I was, still a single major, now retired.
So you could fly on the military?
No, I had the money to, I probably could have.
Mm-hmm.
But the trouble with those military flights is you're at the mercy of their schedule, and if you're, trying to target any kind of tight schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I just did commercially.
Okay. So when did you get married?
Well, I retired, went back to Korea. I did 4 more months there, closed out everything, set everything up for my predecessor and my successor. And I left there on December 15th of '96. I went to Germany to visit, my then fiance in Germany. Kind of saw where we were going to be hanging out for 3 years once I got there, and then came back home and did everything for the next 9 months to get ready for it. And in September '97, we got married just outside where she was from, Coxsackie, New York. Actually, it was more near Amsterdam where we got married, but and then within 4 days we were over in Germany, and then 2 days later she was down in Hungary because the military over there was involved in the whole thing that going on in Kosovo,
Mm-hmm.
and the support that was going on down there. So she was down there for 6 months while I was getting used to Germany as a retiree, and as a retiree over there, you don't have status. I had more status as a military dependent to my wife than I had as a retiree over there.
Really?
Yeah. So it was pretty interesting. And I went back to, I immediately started working for the Catholic chaplain there
Mm-hmm.
at the chapel. And actually I was kind of doing pretty full-time work for what was considered a part-time job, but what else? I had
Mm-hmm.
nothing else really going on. And I did go back to school. And I took one class and realized my heart wasn't in, so I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked, continued to work for the chaplain there, and she came back to Germany and started her new job. And then within about 2 months, she was pregnant. And 9 months later, in February of 1999, we had our first child.
Now, was she able to stay in?
Yeah, she stayed on active duty. Well, she stayed on active duty until we left there in September 2000. But the day she went back after 6 weeks, she stared at the bassinet, and I knew, so I said, her time is, she's going to want to, switch gears here. And I was actually home taking care of him with still part-time duties at the church, so I would take Charlie with me and go in when I needed to, but mostly it was us during the day at where we lived, because we were actually a good 20 minutes kind of up the hill in the sort of the mountains outside of Heidelberg, so we weren't right there, in the compound. It was a bit of a drive, so it was beautiful countryside there in Germany.
So she left the service.
Well, she left the active duty.
Mm-hmm.
We came back here, and my mother-in-law, when my mother-in-law found out that we were, looking at coming back, she says, well, you like what you're doing at the chapel there, right? She goes, I said, yeah, I love it. She goes, would you like to do that on the outside, that kind of work? I said, well, yeah, I'd love to, but I said, I'm not so sure it would, make enough money to, take care of a growing family. So she was reading we're in the Albany Diocese here, and Coxsackie's part of the Albany Diocese, and the Evangelist newspaper of the diocese was talking about these pastoral associate positions. where I do work, where you work for the priest,
Mm-hmm.
and in the area of faith formation, youth ministry, administration, or whatever. And she said, would you be interested? I said, well, I would. I said, but, it's kind of going to be a lot up to my wife because, number one, she's going to go into reserves, but her goal is to be at home mostly and take care of the growing family. And so whatever I do, I have to be able to, with my military retirement and what I'm doing, make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
And chances are, if you're working for the church, you're not gonna have your cup's not gonna runneth over.
You're taking a vow of poverty.
Well, in a way, it definitely was a change of lifestyle. But my wife, coming from the farm, and
Mm-hmm.
they weren't rich. She says, I'd like to simplify our life, and let's give it a try. So I called. This was January of 2000, and I was already trying to become qualified as a junior ROTC advisor,
Mm-hmm.
which those positions are at high schools.
Yeah.
So retirees put their uniform back on and act as mentors in a kind of paramilitary situation.
Sure.
And hopefully that these kids would go on to, regular ROTC or go into the military or whatever. So while we're doing that, I called and talked to Father Joe Sabula, who was out of Stamford, New York, at Sacred Heart. And he says, well, in April, early April, we're going to be dealing with the hiring of the position. Would you be able to come back and talk to us face to face? And I said, well, I'll see what I can do. Yeah, he was impressed that someone from Germany would be calling up, about this.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved what I was doing and working for the church, so I wanted to continue to do it. So it's set up so I'd come back in April of 2000 for a week, and I'd go to Stanford, do an interview there with their selection group, and then go just an hour north was where my in-laws lived, so go up say hi to them. And then while I was there, he said, if you don't get this, whether or not you get this position or not, is what you ought to do before you go back to Germany is go up to the Albany Diocese and talk to Jean Schrempf. She's the director of the Office of Evangelization Catechesis. She'd be a good one to know. So I did that. And he also said that eventually I didn't, and I did that. I told her, I said, yes, I would like to, and if I don't get that, I'd like to stay in the Albany area. And he eventually called me up and said they'd selected somebody, nearby. Someone was already in the parish. And he says, but what I did is I sent your resume and the other guy who also was trying for it, another guy, I sent your resume out to another that was looking for another church that was looking for a pastoral associate. And I said, okay, well, thank you. So I was disappointed. And at that point, I was still struggling to get qualified to be an ROTC instructor. So I was really frustrated. But anyway, I called Jean Schrempf at the diocese, so I didn't make it. What else was there? And she said, well, there's an opening in Coxsackie. And so I ended up, calling here, and then calling where Father Sabula had sent my resume to in Niskayuna, St. Helens, and set up to talk to them on what ended up being a Tuesday morning my time over there in Germany of 2 in the morning. It was about 9 o'clock here. I did an interview with them, and then later that week, on Sunday afternoon, Mother's Day of 2000, in the afternoon there, 9 o'clock here, I called and interviewed with them. And I got offered the job, so I took it. And
You've been here ever since.
been here ever since. And my wife eventually, she did another 6 years, another 5 years of reserve duty,
Mm-hmm.
where she was going back and forth on weekends to, what used to be Fort Devens in Massachusetts. And she attained the rank of lieutenant colonel, and she was 17 and a half years, and they started tossing her name around for overseas, and she says, I got 4 kids, I'll get out.
Mm-hmm.
So she got out.
And what is your wife's name?
Krista M. Hurting Derosier.
And what are your children's names?
Charlie, he's going to be 12 next month, in February. Regina, who just turned 10. Therese, who is 7.5, and Catherine, who's 4.5.
And did you join any veterans organizations at all?
Yeah, actually, while I was still in active duty, I became a member of a lifetime member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And when I was in Virginia, and I got transferred up here after I moved here. So I'm a VFW member here and also American Legion.
Have you stayed in contact with anyone you were in service with?
Trying to think, since I've been here, have I really been in contact? Yeah. One guy, actually, he always would call me. He was a master sergeant when I was up at Fort Drum in the public affairs office, and he knows my wife and myself really well. He's retired now, Master Sergeant Randy Murphy, and he's actually living out in Buffalo these days. And once in a while, out of nowhere, I get a phone call. So it's kind of nice. And now that Facebook is out there, I try to reach out and touch, maybe some people that I used to know, and so hopefully I'll be able to do that. But there's no one I know that's like really close by to get together with, that I'm aware of.
Have you attended any sort of reunions at all?
Well, when I was still in active duty in '95, the General Pagonis, who had received his 3rd star from General Schwarzkopf during the war in Saudi, he came back, and eventually, in a couple of years, he retired and took over as the logistics guru of Sears Roebuck in Chicago. And they started a 22nd Support Command. I guess at some point, I don't know if I still officially belong to them or not, but an organization of people that had been at the 22nd Support Command. And I did get to one reunion in 1995 down in Virginia, because the home of the logistics folks is in Virginia. I just happened to be in Virginia, so I got down there for one. But that's the kind of last that I've been able to do. Yeah, I get involved when they have parades here or special occasions on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. It's small, kind of small, because the numbers are dwindling at this point. Anytime a veteran dies, the vets from both organizations, American Legion, VFW, go to the funeral home and lay on honors, and so I get involved in that when I can.
How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life?
I guess now I'm in my 50s. I'll be probably trying to sort that all out, because I didn't think as a teenager that I was really the kind of person that would make a career out of the military. And still, if I had been a combat arms person, I don't know how long I would have lasted. I don't know. But for the things that I did, I very much enjoyed the military. I think it. I don't know if it changed me. It gave me. I was already a pretty structured person, so it helped me hone working in structure. And I think it really gave me, a lot of confidence and organization skills. And even though it helps me to overcome some of the difficulties some people have getting up and talking in front of people. I always liked doing that, but I've always been nervous about it. Well, the military forced you into being able to get up at a moment's notice and talk to groups of people. So in a lot of ways, I felt that the military trained me to do anything after that, organizationally. And particularly in a job now where I'm doing mostly stuff all on my own. I don't have, a team of people to turn to and say, you take care of this, you take care of this. I do in a way. I've got volunteers. But in the military, you got people that are paid to do that, so you're the chief of the organization, and you have to make sure everything gets done. But now it's sort of like I run pretty good sized programs, but I don't necessarily have someone I can turn to and say, here, do this right now. So you have to be very organized and put up with a lot of record keeping and papers and all that kind of stuff, and I think the military helped me, as a personnel officer, helped me to be able to do that. And working with chaplains and like, helped me to, stay in touch with my spiritual side, my, faith side quite a bit. Being involved in ministry the whole long as either a lector or Eucharistic minister or a music person everywhere I went. So it was a good life.
All right.
Good life.
Thank you so much for your interview.